Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready and are you willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Well, today's topic will put that to the test. Welcome, my friends, to the fully engaged life. Welcome back to the show, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Today's topic has a tendency to be rather challenging for most people. So if you make it all the way to the end of this podcast, you're doing a great job. Today's topic has the tendency to invoke a rather strong egoic resistance when we address it. That's why I consider the topic of letting go to be one of the most despised concepts in spirituality. And it makes sense because this idea of non-attachment is essential to all spirituality. So it only stands to reason that the ego would try to resist this type of teaching. I'm going to share an aspect of this from my own life experience with you today. Hopefully you can relate, if not at least learn something. And with any luck, you'll be capable of setting aside any mental resistance that you might have to this incredible topic. In spirituality, we often speak of such things as forgiveness and compassion. We practice forgiveness and compassion. Yet, when we reach a point where we are instructed to let it go, we run into trouble. The ability to let go is a necessary component of non-attachment that is within the nature of forgiveness, and certainly an incredibly crucial aspect of compassion. Now, in order to make this relatable, I'm going to draw upon a particular situation and use that as an example. So we need to realize that the idea of letting go or non-attachment is an incredibly broad category, and it applies to most everything. Today we're going to deal with some emotions and things like that that seem to be a difficult point for most people to accept. So I'll begin by sharing my own personal experience and using this as an example. I think it was about 1978. I was about 14 years old, and my parents split. I remember the day vividly when my dad came up and told me, he said, I'm leaving. You're the man of the house now. It's time to grow the hell up. And he turned around and left. Now, at that point in time, I figured what he meant was something like, okay, you're the oldest guy in the house now, so, it's time to step up and take some responsibility. I would have been okay with that. I didn't realize what I was getting into, though. Even though my parents fought nonstop every single night. Vicious fights, screaming, yelling. No physical abuse that I'm aware of, although in the earlier years before my brother and I were born, that did take place. So regardless of how poorly these two people got along, the split and subsequent divorce itself took a toll on my mom. And I remember one night I awakened in my bed to hear her on the phone talking to someone and crying, and her voice sounded kind of strange. And then I heard a tremendous thud as her body hit the kitchen floor. It seems that she had OD'd on alcohol and pills. So I threw my covers off and ran out to see, and sure enough, I found her laying there, pretty out of it, completely unconscious on the kitchen floor. And it seemed like only about a minute later, a longtime friend of the family's showed up at the door to come in and help. And that's who she was on the phone with. The thing was more of a stunt trying to get my dad to come running back to her than anything. And since it was the late 70s, she was very lucky that they didn't just automatically keep her for a psych hold, which they have a tendency to do now, because she had 2 boys at home, so they let her come back. It was the only time she tried that. It didn't work, so she continued to try all sorts of things that didn't work. And eventually it got to where I was doing a lot of the raising of my younger brother. She was out every night at various bars and doing whatever it was she was doing. The thing that helped us a great deal was my grandparents. They helped us out in so many ways. Lovely, lovely people. And of course, we were on welfare. We had food stamps and that crazy government cheese that seemed a little bit like Velveeta and gelatinous texture stuff. I don't even know what that stuff really was. And then, of course, we had a parade of guys that would come in and live with us, for a few months, and they'd be gone and again. But what really opened up my eyes to the statement my dad made when he left was one night when all of a sudden, I don't know what it was. My mom had been out at the bars for hours. I think it was about 3:30 or so in the morning. I was sleeping on the couch. My brother was in his room. And whenever she would stay out, I didn't sleep well because it was my job to take care of him. So I kind of oversaw the house, right? Made sure everything was secure and that sort of thing. And about 3:30 in the morning, all of a sudden a car pulls up and they're shining their bright lights in the house. And we lived in a very, very quiet neighborhood. And they're actually pulling their car up into our front yard and doing donuts, tearing up the lawn. And they get out and they're screaming and yelling. There was a woman and a man and they're screaming and yelling. And then they started trying to kick our front door in. And that's when I realized that this was an issue. So I looked around. The only thing I had found rather quickly was an iron fireplace poker. So I grabbed that, situated myself next to the front door that they were trying to kick in. These were obviously people that my mom had ticked off at the bar, and she was screaming all kinds of nasty names about her and stuff, even though she wasn't there. And then as they continued trying to kick the door in, I had to make a decision, and that was the first time I made a decision that I would seriously cause harm to someone else. I had no idea of the intention of these people, but they were obviously drunk, probably high. They were very, very violent. And I knew I needed to protect my brother. So I stood there just gripping so tightly that fireplace poker and waiting for them to actually kick through the door. And I was just going to swing as hard as I could. And it was at that moment that I truly understood what he meant when he told me that I had to become the man of the house and grow the hell up. Fortunately, the front door held out, so nothing more had to happen other than some destructive stuff they did outside in the driveway. So this was a kind of thing that transpired, and like so many other people, for one reason or another, my parents split up and, my dad left and took off. We didn't see him much after that. Every once in a while we would here and there, but never had much of a relationship the rest of his life. This scenario is not all that unique, is it? A great many people that I know and students and friends and everybody, has this type of situation or something similar, right, to go on. Unfortunately, this sort of thing happens a lot. But I understood, they didn't get along at all. And, I found myself in a similar situation many years later. And I chose to stay in a very unhappy, unhealthy relationship until both of my kids were fully grown and going out on their own. And that was just a decision that I made, that I decided to do the best I could for them. And then I escaped that sort of very toxic situation. Okay, so that's the example we have. Now let's take a look at what that has to do with this idea of non-attachment or letting go. Because the idea of letting go can generally trigger the ego faster and stronger than just about anything I have witnessed in teaching this sort of thing to people for decades now. It's the ego that clings to such things and refuses to let it go. Many people have a tendency to dwell on it because they have made it part of their identity. Major flaw, major mistake. It is the ego that refuses to let go. I've actually heard students tell me when we get to this area of the training, well, I like who I am, and I'm not going to let go of anything. This is actually a blatant indication of the ego clinging to the identity that it itself has created, and shows how the ego is dominating the mind itself. So what does all this talk about the ego and letting go and non-attachment have to do with the example that I provided from my childhood? Well, because so many people have experienced the same thing or something similar, sometimes much worse than what I did, and they carry this with them. They carry a sort of hatred towards their father. They carry, this identity of being abandoned and all this stuff for their entire life. And when we carry, this hatred, resentment, we have this sort of victim mentality, identity. When we carry that with us through our entire lives, it's not hurting anybody else. We're not getting back at anybody else. It's only eating us up. It's keeping us with a closed heart, a low vibrational frequency. It's keeping us miserable in life. And this life is only a drop in the bucket of time. It goes by so quickly. Why? Why would we waste that precious time carrying around all of that negativity, allowing it to ruin our lives by our own design? It is not the other person's fault that it ruins our life. It is our own. It is our own egoic attachments that cause that. If we could let go, we could be free of it. If only we knew how to let go, if we knew how to give up these attachments and let go of all that stuff, all that garbage, we could actually experience freedom. We could have an open heart and a high vibration, and we could actually enjoy our lives. Remember, there's a saying, right, that says that everybody has a life, but all too few people actually live it. This is an example of that. You see, in the end, when we die, we let go of everything anyway. All this stuff goes away. So why carry it around throughout our entire lifetime? Why burden ourselves and live with negative emotions, crippling emotions in some cases, during the brief time that we have to live? Why should we do that when the only benefit of it is to bolster our ego and allow our ego to remain clinging to these things from the past? If, when we die, we naturally go through a process of letting go, why cling to the negativity and allow it to ruin our life? Clinging to negativity and negative aspects of identity like this acts as a mental poison. And the only one that it hurts is the one clinging to it, the one that is holding it within them. Indulge me for a moment while I verify this idea of how we naturally let go when we die. Again, I'm going to draw from my own personal experience. In this case, it's a death experience. Okay? As you die, your physical senses fade away. The last sense to leave us is our hearing. So as I was dying from choking to death on a large red-hot jawbreaker, I noticed that I couldn't see anymore. Obviously, smell and taste were gone. And then I had a sense of physical feeling for a little while that would come and go, and then I couldn't feel anything physically anymore. Yet I could still hear voices in the background. I could still hear family members. I could hear the paramedic. I could hear all the things that were going on. Okay? There is a point that is reached where we start to go beyond the physical senses. And this is when the body is no longer breathing, the heart is no longer beating, and the mind begins to fade. This is when we are returned to conscious awareness. It's at this point where mind starts to fade away. And if you remember the previous episode where I talked about the stupa, right, with those elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and void, oftentimes void is significant of the mind. We have the 4 layers of the body. Those include the senses and things, and then we have the mind. So they are all part of the person. All of that goes away when we die. So we reach a point where the mind is starting to fade, and it seems to have like one last final hurrah before falling away completely. For me, from my experience, I was 14 when this happened. So 14 was a real stellar year for me, wasn't it? 14 was just fantastic. All kinds of great things going on. So I vividly recall from this experience that there were thoughts that arose as I could hear my brother yelling and crying in the background, and the paramedic trying to dislodge this thing, all these things. The voices were becoming more faint, but I can remember these thoughts going through my head of, oh my goodness, wait a minute, this can't happen because I haven't finished my homework yet. And who's going to protect my little brother? And there were a couple other thoughts kind of like that, and then all of a sudden they went away, and there was a gentle sense, not physical sense, but a sense. I can't say feeling because it's not a feeling, it's just a sense. It's an awareness of something that I can only describe as comfort. I somehow was aware, I sensed that there was some sort of understanding that none of that matters anymore. And you feel it fade away. Anything that you were worried about clinging to, anything at all, along with your identity, starts to fade away. So that started to go away. And it was at that moment that I was very aware that life goes on without you, and everyone is going to be just fine. And there was just that sense of knowing, that awareness and comfort that happened at that moment. And then usually that is the moment where mind is ceasing to be, and there is only conscious awareness. And when you experience that, there's an awareness for a strange sense of relief and freedom. And I'm not encouraging here death as a means of becoming free of these things by taking your own life or something like that. Doesn't happen that way. It happens when we let go naturally and we're able to pass in a natural manner, untormented. Okay? So that is the entire point of this particular podcast, is to take back our life, to live this life, because life is an incredible adventure. My wife and I have one planned right now. As a matter of fact, all of the dates have just been confirmed this morning. It's time for a great adventure. And life is such an amazing thing, and it's just a blink of an eye, people. It's just a blink of an eye. You got to enjoy that blink. Enjoy it for all it's worth. It's not worth clinging to all of this negativity. Let it go. So you may ask, Robert, do you have any negative feelings towards your father for doing that? No, absolutely not. And I didn't for a very, very, very long time. I let it go. I let go of that a long time ago. I realize he's his own person and he did what he had to do. That's just the way it is. It's not a reflection on me. I don't need to make that part of my identity. I matured rather quickly, but that wasn't a bad thing, because as things played out, I ended up being on my own since the time I was about 16 and a half years old. I made the conscious decision long, long ago to let go, to not cling to any of that. I didn't need it as part of my identity. It has had no bearing whatsoever on who I am as a person that anyone knows, and it hasn't been able to negatively impact my life since I found the spiritual practices that help you to let go correctly. I harbor absolutely no resentment whatsoever. And this is good for just about anything and anyone in life, to be able to let go of anything negative, because when we cling to that, when we hold on to that, we're only harming ourselves. We're not harming the other person at all, in which case you are causing them to continue to harm you, and they're not even aware of it. It's all self-inflicted. One of the things I realized as a truth long, long ago is that for most people, they're doing the best they can. Just because they aren't doing what we want them to do doesn't make any difference, doesn't make it any better, doesn't make it any more right to cling to. It's just yet another indication of how it is ego-oriented. And yes, when we refer to letting go in spiritual systems, we're referring to letting go of the self. In this case, it's with a little s, right? The little s usually refers to the self of the mind, and more precisely, the ego, the false self. So when we go through authentic practices to let go of the false self, guess what? All the other stuff drops away. All the other anger, fears, all the things we're clinging to, all that sort of stuff drops away. This is why they refer to it as a small death or a spiritual death or what have you. It's always referred to, the ego is referred to as dying. And this is why, because it's the same process. When you actually let go and you cleanse yourself of that in this life, in this physical body and mind, you are essentially accomplishing one of the things that normally doesn't happen until you die. But we can do it in this body. We are capable of it. And that is what opens us up to living such an incredible adventure and a fully engaged life. Most people in their lifetime will never even realize that they have a choice. That they have the choice to let go if they desire, that they have the choice to overcome the ego and to live authentically, consciously in this body and mind. They don't even know. They aren't even aware that all of the stuff they're clinging to is just going to go away when they die anyway, so why not just rid yourself of it now? It just really shows how meaningless, how worthless it all is. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make a difference. So if you haven't gone through a situation similar to mine, although I know many, many of you have, if you haven't, I'm sure there's something in life that you can equate to that and use as an example. And then search yourself. Are you harboring any of these sort of negative emotions and resentment and such? Are you clinging to any of that? Have you unwittingly made the critical error of making it part of your identity? Well, you need to understand that it can be fixed. There are practices out there. Only through authentic spiritual systems are you going to be able to accomplish it. Modern New Age fake spirituality stresses healing, right? So there's all this different type of healing that they offer to do this, to do that. But one of the things I've noticed is it never works. I know so many people that have gone to dozens and dozens of these healing events, and yet what happens? They're carrying around the same junk they've always carried around. Doesn't work. But there are practices that work. You can release the clinging, the attachment. You can overcome that stuff. You can let go of the ego. I mean, think about it. Just think about it if you were able to have sort of that death experience, but you're alive and healthy, just by sitting back and paying attention to this and contemplating this. What if anything you were clinging to just kind of dissolved away without any effort whatsoever, just went away? Just like that. Imagine how much better you would feel. Imagine how your heart would be capable of opening, how your vibration would rise, how you would live with a sense of love and appreciation. And I'll share one final life experience with you, and that is that feels incredible. So we are blessed to have actual practices that can allow us to accomplish this as we are enjoying life, so we can enjoy life. We don't have to wait for death. We can do it right here, right now, in this body, in this lifetime, and allow ourselves to enjoy the amazing experience of life. Okay, if all of that discussion concerning letting go didn't chase you away, have you click the stop button, you're still with me. Congratulations, you are awesome. And that's a good indication that you are ready to move forward. So I salute you for that, and I support you in doing so. I hope you are highly successful. It's worth the effort. I also hope that you will take the time to visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. You can get an autographed copy of Expansion Mastery there at the website, as well as some other goodies. Check it out. Make sure that you share this podcast. Help get this type of information out to as many people as you know. Let's spread the word. Let's wake people up. And make sure that you do all that social media stuff, share, like, subscribe, smash the buttons or whatever they're asking you to do nowadays. Anything you do is always appreciated. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your support. Thank you for that. And together we can experience an incredible consciousness shift. Until next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and your life. Take care.